Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is April 5th and Easter is so close, and I am really looking forward to it. My husband and I are actually going to be visiting our friends for the holiday, so that'll be a nice little break for us. Now, today is a special day, and I'm laughing because I knew this day was coming, but I honestly thought it wouldn't be this soon. Here's the thing. The people that I've been having on my show as guests are people that I'm dying to talk to. I'm really interested in their books. I'm fascinated with what they're doing in their careers, and I really want to speak with them. And, I think that all of you will want to hear from them too. But one of the reasons why I'm choosing the authors that I'm choosing is because I'm really interested in what they have to say. And I've had to remind myself that whenever I sit down to start talking to these people, that I have to remember there's going to be an audience that's listening who does not know who these people are and why I'm talking to them. And we need to give an introduction at the beginning of the show so that you can follow along with us. Well, it finally happened. This last interview, I just dove in talking to this person about her books and her career and completely forgot that we needed to introduce her to all of you. So I'm going to do that now so you'll be able to follow along with the rest of the interview. My guest today is not only an academic, but she is also co-author of 5 books that are part of the Science of series, and a 6th book is getting ready to come out soon. She is also very involved in podcasting. She co-hosts the podcast Horror Rewind with her co-author that she writes the books with. And it has been said that it is the best horror podcast that is streaming now. That's a pretty good endorsement if you ask me. Now, she is also involved in theater, and she goes to Comic Cons and meet and greet events. I mean, there's just so much that this woman does. You're going to love her. So, without further ado, please welcome to Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, author, podcaster, college instructor, and all-around horror hottie, Kelly Florence. I am so excited to have you here with me today because I have been a horror fan since birth.
Yes,
and
same.
I know I had asked you which one of your books I should read to get a good idea of you, and you had suggested The Science of Women in Horror.
Yes.
And I went on to buy that one, and then I saw The Science of Monsters. I'm like, oh, and I had to buy that one.
Great.
Because I have always been such a huge Universal Studios monster movie fan.
Yes.
I have the entire collection of all of their old black and white movies. And when I saw that you actually had a book where you talk about so many of them, I just was like, okay, I'm so looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, same. I loved all of those movies when I was growing up, and I always empathized with the monsters. And I guess that's part of what makes horror so interesting is that you think, how could you possibly love Frankenstein's monster? But I do.
Well, and he was the victim in the whole thing because
Exactly.
he was not asked to be created. And then he was being persecuted for how he behaved to what he was thrown into. So I mean, I totally understand you pointing out that he is somebody that you sympathize with.
Yeah. Same with King Kong. Poor King Kong. We was done dirty.
Well, he was ripped out of his environment and thrown in someplace new. And then people were surprised when a creature reacted oddly and violently to this new environment that was so strange.
Exactly.
And I think most people don't look at horror movies like that.
Right. That's the interesting thing that we discovered writing these books too, is just looking at horror through the lens of science. We proved that sometimes truth is scarier than fiction, and that all of these things that we think are so fantastical or out there are really based on nature and things that are happening around us in our environment and the world. And that's what makes these books so much fun, and just the horror genre, I think.
I definitely agree. There's so many things that people will watch a movie like Tremors. and they don't look at it beyond just what they're seeing on the screen,
Right.
especially when you're talking about with creatures.
Yeah. Then when we were doing the research for that book in particular, researching all of these real things in nature that exist, whether it's in space or in the ocean or under the ground, like you said, in Tremors, there's a lot of fascinating and real monsters in the world.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Now, and one thing that I was really surprised about when I started doing a little bit of research on you, you are not just known as a gothic horror mogul or the horror hottie, but you are also an academic. You have a BA in theater, a master's in communication, and you teach communication at Lake Superior College.
Yes. I've been teaching since 2004, and I've been at Lake Superior College now for 10 years. I think part of what makes a good teacher and a good writer is the curiosity. And so staying, always learning, and then taking that curiosity and passing it on to my students and know that there's always something to learn and there's always something to research. And I'm learning every day.
Well, and you're quite varied in your interests too, because you're not just an author, but you're a podcaster and you're still involved in theater. You direct, you produce, you choreograph, you've done stage management. Is there anything you haven't done in theater?
You know, I'm expanding my skills in theater. I'm working on learning more about audio and audio boards, which is fun. And I guess I haven't, I did in college, but I haven't done a lot of design elements like lighting design or costume design. And so I would say that's not my forte, but I'm always, again, willing to learn.
And I was always surprised how people don't really realize how much lighting adds to the mood of every scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And in theater or TV or film, it makes such a difference. And you don't realize it until you see something that is badly lit. Maybe it's a TV show that's not lit well. It's like, oh, that really makes a difference. So I really appreciate that skill.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an art form.
Definitely.
I suspected that whenever you had suggested that I read The Science of Women in Horror, that it had to do with something that you had listed on your website about that you have a passion for female representation in media and gender.
Yes. We like to think of that book as sort of our feminist manifesto in a way, because we really got to talk about how women have been portrayed in the horror genre and those tropes, but also how women really have been the pioneers of the genre since its inception, starting with Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein when she was 19 years old. And so that the horror genre, it's more than just, an 80s slasher movie, which a lot of people immediately will think of when you say that you like horror. And there's nothing wrong with 80s slashers. I love those too, but it's so much more, and it's so much more complicated than that. And when we were doing our research for that book, we realized women typically speak more in horror movies than any other genre. And so they have a voice. That trope of the final girl, women often survive. Of course, there's the flip side of that, and there's some misogynistic, violent things that we don't advocate for. But typically, women have been in the horror genre for decades and decades, and we thought it was really important to bring that to light.
I know there are 5 books that you and your writing partner, because you actually write with another person.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's, I hope I'm going to say her name right, Meg Haftel?
Hofdahl. Yep.
Haftel. So how did you get connected with Meg?
We met 23 years ago this summer. I was wearing an X-Files t-shirt. She was working in a gift shop that I was shopping in. And she said, "I like your shirt." And I'm like, "Oh, are you a fan?" And we started talking. We exchanged emails like you did back in 2000. And we immediately discovered that we had so much in common. We both loved horror, of course, mentioned the X-Files, and we both loved writing. And so we've been best friends ever since. We started our podcast together now 5 years ago because we were talking about horror movies all the time anyway. And then we realized as we were talking about our podcast, we were always gravitating towards the real history, science, psychology, lore that these movies and TV shows were based on. And then that became our first book, The Science of Monsters. We're talking about this every week. We should be writing about it. And now our 6th book is coming out this fall, The Science of Agatha Christie. And we just keep writing because there's so much to write about in the horror genre. And also, Agatha Christie, a lot of people don't think, well, that's not horror. That's a cozy mystery. But there's murder and science in every single story. And so we realized that this is like horror adjacent, and we want to bring mystery fans into it and realize, hey, not all horror is what you think. We also interviewed a chemist for that book, and she was absolutely spot on and accurate with everything she wrote about. So that's really fascinating too, because sometimes people will think, oh, it's an author, they're just making stuff up. But really, she did her research. She knew what she was talking about. She had worked with a pharmacist in her life.
Mm-hmm.
She actually ended up catching a mistake that the pharmacist made and ended up saving someone's life. And so she knew her science.
It's a good thing to put real science in your horror books and maybe have the possibility that somebody will take a hint for that when actually committing crimes. Or is it better to make up everything? Because certain authors just created a plant to make a poison for their story. And that way it fit everything they wanted their story to have. And so, I mean, that's really interesting things to consider whenever authors are using actual medical knowledge to explain their poisons and their methods of killing.
Right. Yeah, I haven't thought about that much. And we interviewed an indigenous ethnobotanist about the healing properties of plants for our book about the science of witchcraft. Because a lot of times, you'll read a book or see a movie about these potions and it sounds very woo-woo and out there.
Yeah.
But as she was saying, this has been around for centuries and we are surrounded by science and healing properties. And so I think as long as people aren't using it for nefarious reasons, I think it's so good to use real science and real things because we're teaching the world.
Oh, yeah. And I don't think a lot of people really seem to realize that a lot of the medicines that we have today are based on natural cures that they have just synthesized and made it cheaper to produce in a chemical manner instead of the original natural manner that they were deriving these from.
Right. Yeah. It's really fascinating. And also getting into that argument about genetically modified things. And when you see the pictures of what a watermelon is really supposed to look like versus how they've made it better so we get more fruit out of it. It's very interesting.
I also wanted to talk to you about your book, The Science of Serial Killers, because I have a definite interest in this. I have a degree in forensic criminology, and I actually specialized in profiling.
Wow.
I got to study with one of the lead detectives who helped catch the BTK killer, who I know you have in your book.
Yes.
And I took a seminar with Robert Ressler, who was one of the original individuals who helped put together the behavioral science unit for the FBI. So whenever I was looking at that book of yours, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've studied some of these cases.
Yes. Yeah, that book was fascinating to research and write, but I think it was definitely the most difficult in the sense that when we're writing about fictional monsters, it's easy to separate yourself from Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
But these were real killers and real victims. And so researching that, a lot of days I just had to step away and get a palate cleanser of something upbeat because it's fascinating. Everybody's fascinated with serial killers, but it's so real and horrific. And we wanted to make sure too not to put them up on pedestals and be like, hey, these guys are super smart. They weren't necessarily, especially, they got caught, they made mistakes, and their crimes were horrific.
That was actually one of the questions that I had for you, because since you do work so much with horror, does it ever get to be too much? Do you ever think, okay, I need to go watch Mary Poppins or something?
Yeah, like you said, I have a variety of things that I'm into. I love a good musical. And so I do sometimes, like I said, need that palate cleanser. But I think typically I don't shy away from a lot of horror. Not a lot bothers me so much. I know some people really don't like gore or slashers. Those don't bother me because I know that it's fictional. I don't want to watch a real surgery, though, on TV. Yeah. And so that's where it's interesting. That's where I differ.
You do your horror podcast with your writing partner, Meg. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Now, what about the Be a Better Communicator podcast?
I started that one on my own, actually, over a sabbatical that I had a few years ago as a way for my students to have another way to listen to short lectures or short things about what we were studying that week. And so then I expanded it into very job specific interviews. I had sent out surveys for people in industries that I know my students are going into to talk about what employers are looking for and just how to be a better communicator in life with your friends and at work. I think it's so important because we can all, as I said, we all should be constantly learning, improving, and we can all learn to be better communicators.
Oh, definitely. I would have loved something like that whenever I was in college, but
Oh, yeah.
I'm old enough that that was not a thing back then.
Right. And that's the thing that I like to do is offer a variety of ways of learning because we all know not everybody likes to read, not everybody likes to listen to a podcast, but some people prefer that. And I know I found out a lot of students, they'll be on the bus or they'll be driving and they want to listen to something instead of reading it because it's going to be faster and that's what works into their schedule. And so it was a really good fit.
I read somewhere on, I think it was on your website, that your partner Meg is actually a pantser where you're more of a plotter.
Oh.
So how do you two manage those different styles?
Yeah, for some reason, I think it works out because we balance each other out. And we both are fast workers. We're both fast writers, but because of how we work, it just balances. And so I do like to plan things out. And maybe that's part of my teaching. I like to have my entire semester laid out, the entire class. I know what we're doing on day one and I know what we're doing at week 16.
Oh, wow.
And for me,
impressive.
that's how I work best. But I know some other teachers who like week by week, well, what are we going to do this week? And they figure it out. But that's just not how I'm comfortable. So I think anything can work as long as you know in your mind how you work best.
I know that your horror podcast has actually been called the best horror film podcast out there by Film Daddy.
Yes, that was awesome when we saw that review.
What is the setup for that? Do you cover just a movie? Do you do interviews? How is that podcast set up?
When we started, it was picking the movies from our childhood that we used to rent, but like Horror Rewind, it's a VHS. Mm-hmm. The movies that we used to rent from our local video stores, and then seeing if they lived up to our nostalgia and memories of it.
Oh yeah.
And how did they compare through the lens of today? Because when you're a kid, you might love a movie and then you watch it when you're an adult and you're like, oh, this was not great. Yeah. And so we started with picking out those favorite movies from our childhood and revisiting them.
So what was your favorite movie as a child?
I would say Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, good one.
Yeah. And that was actually our very first episode because I was in kindergarten when I got it from Santa on Christmas morning. I got the VHS of Night of the Living Dead. Oh, wow. Maybe it's a questionable choice to give for a kindergartner, but Santa knew me. I'll just say that. And yeah. I did love it. And so as we kept going, though, we realized there's so much new horror to talk about. So we started talking about new horror TV shows, movies, books. We have had guests on and interviewed people. In particular, we know an actor who was in the Addams Family movies. So we had him on as a guest when we talked about the Addams Family. And it's been so much fun to meet listeners, talk about our books on the podcast too, and just go out and talk about this genre that we love and hopefully shed some light on, to us, it's our favorite genre.
I know that you actually met one of the actors who is in The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Just recently passed away, but he was at a convention that we were selling books at, and we were able to meet him and his daughter, and he was lovely. We gave him a copy of our book because we wrote about the movie, of course, and the science of monsters, and that was really great.
One of the things that I thought was just absolutely hilarious that you have in your book, I don't remember, I think it might have been The Science of Serial Killers, where you mention the menacing eyebrows of Vincent Price.
Yes.
What is so funny is I've seen so many of his movies and I never really thought about it. But whenever I saw that line, I cracked up laughing because that is true. That is an accurate description of him.
Yes, I absolutely love Vincent Price. I've probably seen every movie of his that I could get my hands on because he was just, even though, he's this horror icon, there's just something about him and his voice that's comforting in an odd way. And he's an incredible actor and just a good person too. When you read about his biography and his history, and I know it's a meme and a gif, but him on Sesame Street with Kermit, there's just so many nostalgic things when I think about Vincent Price. It's very comforting.
Now, was that line in The Science of Serial Killers?
I can't remember offhand.
I've been looking through so many of your books today. I'm getting them confused in my head because
no, that's okay. And
I've been going through all of them.
Like I said, we just finished our 6th book, and so some of them start to blend together. It's like, wait, what did we talk about in that one, or what was the topic? So yeah, it's a lot, which is a good problem to have.
I was really kind of interested to see that you would devote an entire book to Stephen King.
Yes.
What is it that you like about Stephen King?
We both have been lifelong Stephen King fans. Again, I think I was in first grade when I saw the edited for TV version of The Shining.
Mm-hmm.
And it blew me away. It was so scary, but in sort of a subtle way. It's that
Oh, yeah.
in doom and dread. And so I really like that. As soon as I started writing, I was like, I want to write like Stephen King. Read his books growing up, loved the Dark Tower series. And so we were brainstorming for what we were going to write next after Women in Horror. I'm like, we need to write about Stephen King because there's so much to write about. I mean, he's just constantly releasing new material. So it's part biography, what was happening in his life at the time, and it's chronological. What inspired the stories, what really was happening in his life to inspire, what was happening with him personally in his journey with like his car accident or his addiction issues, and then discovering that real science that is in all of his stories. And so we could write probably 4 more volumes of Stephen King because he's written so much and there's just so much to explore.
Now, have you actually visited the Stanley Hotel in Colorado?
Yes, absolutely fascinating. And I can see how he was inspired by that place. And I haven't gone in the supposed haunted room, but it's just a gorgeous establishment. And yeah, I can definitely see how he was inspired.
I got to go there one time for a long weekend, and I was like, yeah, I can see how this would inspire people to write horror movies because
Yeah,
as beautiful as it is, and just it's
right.
such a wonderful place to go visit, there's also a creepy element to it.
Definitely. And that's, I think, what's so fascinating about how writers and especially horror writers get inspired because it can just be the smallest thing or a major event. But I know when we read Stephen King was working as a custodian and he was cleaning a girl's bathroom at a high school and he saw a tampon dispenser and he had never seen one before. He didn't know what it was. And that actually inspired him to start thinking about writing Carrie. And so just a little thing, seeing something you've never
Yeah.
seen before.
Yeah, because that was such a big scene in Carrie too, where
Yes.
they're tearing the machine down and throwing all the sanitary supplies at her.
Right.
Now, also talking about your book, The Science of Serial Killers, I noticed that you had Lizzie Borden listed in there.
Yes.
And I was curious about that because she was actually acquitted of the murders, even though the belief was that she was responsible for it, but she was acquitted in court. And she was only accused of killing 2 people, her stepmother and her
Right.
father. So that doesn't really classify her as a serial killer. So I was curious as to why you chose to include her in with the serial killer book.
Yes, we know that technically she isn't a serial killer, but when we were talking about women and killers, so many people think of Lizzie Borden, even though maybe she wasn't guilty or maybe she was and was acquitted. But we wanted to include her just because of that history, how much she's inspired the genre and people in the genre, and very famous. And we wanted to include her. And we just stayed at the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast.
I was going to ask if you had been there.
Yeah, so we did all the tours that they had. And it's, again, I think the scariest part of that whole thing is actually being in the house where it happened. We didn't experience anything, ghost wise ourselves, but I think it's scarier just to be there and know the history of what happened.
Oh, definitely. Crime scenes always seem to have like a heavy air to them.
Yeah.
It's like it just changes the energy in the area and everything just seems like it has a weight to it.
Definitely.
Now, there is a little thing that I like to do with a lot of authors. It's just called 5 quick questions.
Sure.
It's simple questions, shouldn't take like a lot of thought. Number 1, what is the best thing for you about being a podcaster?
I think it's being able to talk about what's on my mind at that moment in time. And it's sort of like a snapshot of the moment of my life.
Number 2, not counting Stephen King, what horror author do you always recommend as a must read for people?
I think Meg and I would both say Shirley Jackson. She was a pioneer and her stories are haunting and wonderful and beautiful. So definitely Shirley Jackson.
What would be a title that you would suggest for people?
We've Always Lived in the Castle.
Let's see. And since you have been so involved in theater, is there a favorite stage production that you have seen or been a part of?
Carrie the musical. I was able to stage manage it a few years ago, And we were just in Ohio traveling for our book, and we were able to see a college production of it as well. You wouldn't think it can work as a musical, but it absolutely does.
I have actually been dying to see that because ever since I saw that that was actually being done, I was like, this is something I need to see. But of course, being over here in Germany, it's not around here. I'm
Right.
going to have to like plan a trip home to Kansas when there's something going on where I can catch that.
Yes. Oh, and I have to mention too, another horror musical that I love is Evil Dead, the musical. It's so funny and so clever. And I love Bruce Campbell.
Okay, somehow I have missed that that has been turned into a musical. I
Yeah.
would love that. I love Bruce Campbell. Love the Evil Dead
Yes.
series. That would be so much fun.
We named our son Campbell after Bruce Campbell, and he was able to meet him when he was 5. And Bruce was amazing and took this most epic picture with him. So it's a nice memory.
That is very cool. Let's see. Number 4. What, in your opinion, is the most overdone trope in horror today?
I think it's running the wrong way when you should be running up the stairs when you should be running out the door, as that famous line is. It's just people get so frustrated, and I get frustrated too. It's like, wait, no, do that. You have to do this. This doesn't make any sense. And so I appreciate when the writing or the direction or the design makes sense why they can't do the obvious thing that we're all rooting for them to do.
Yeah. I tell you, one of the most frustrating things about watching something like the Friday the 13th movies is when there's a girl running through the woods and she trips and she lays there screaming. It's like,
yeah,
just get up. He's walking slowly. Get up and run.
Yes.
And
so I would say, yeah, that's definitely it.
No,
right.
Why? Let's see. And number 5, I know that you have a new book coming out, The Science of Agatha Christie, but is there a topic that you would love to write that you have not had the opportunity to get to yet?
It's not necessarily horror, but it's horror adjacent. I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, and I've been rewatching the BBC series lately, and everything, because of how my brain has shifted and I'm always looking through this lens of science, I'm realizing how much science is in every single Sherlock Holmes story. And again, that's very Agatha Christie as well. Detectives figuring out things, but I would say, yeah, Sherlock Holmes.
I tell you, my favorite is Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. I used to stay up all the time and watch those late movies of Sherlock Holmes with the two of them. They are definitely my all-time favorite.
Love. Yeah.
I know we've already talked about you being a big fan of The Shining. I happened to notice that there was a picture that you and your writing partner Meg have on, I think it's on your Amazon.com author page, that you look like you're doing the twin photo from The Shining.
Yes.
Is that what that was?
Yes, definitely. And we each have a Grady girl on our arms. If you've seen that picture, we have matching tattoos, and they hold hands when we stand next to each other. And so
nice.
We both love Stephen King so much, love that movie so much that it was like, hey, this is kind of like the coolest idea for a best friend's tattoo, right? And our tattoo artist designed it. We just love it.
Is that the only tattoo that you have for horror?
No, I've got the Bates Motel on my thigh. I've got Bruce Campbell on my other arm. And we both have matching X-Files tattoos as well, just the X.
Oh, very nice. I used to be a huge X-File fan. Matter of fact, whenever I did entertainment reporting, the first thing I got to write about was the X-Files.
Oh, that's awesome.
And to celebrate doing that, I had an X-Files party with all of the people at the newspaper.
Oh, cool.
Like, so I definitely understand the interest in that one. That was such a great show.
Yes. We were so obsessed. We would have parties for the premieres and finales. When we knew that Scully was going to give birth in that one finale episode, we had a baby shower for Scully.
Oh, nice.
Just silly things like that. And then when it was the finale, when we thought it was over, we buried a time capsule of all the things that we wanted to dig up 10 years later. Of course, the show came back. And so we got those bonus episodes, which was amazing.
Now, what did you think about the movie?
The first movie was good. We weren't as big of fans of the second movie that came out because, they were trying to do that standalone Monster of the Week type movie. And I don't think it worked as well because people needed closure in the mythology. So I won't bash it, but I didn't love it.
What is something that you never get to talk about in interviews that you would love to mention?
Oh, that's a great question. Something that's on my mind right now is snow because I live in Duluth, Minnesota, and we have record-breaking snow. We have, I think, over 110 inches so far this season, and we're
Wow.
supposed to get 7 more inches today.
Oh my God.
So I think when you mention that, it's like, how does this feeling, and it's kind of like The Shining too. You're getting
Hmm.
snowed in. How does that affect your mood and your perception of the world and everything? It's almost like you'll hear women talk about after they give birth. They don't remember the pain because their beautiful baby is there. I think in Minnesota, when the summer comes, we forget about all of the snow. And for some reason, we'll have temporary memory loss. And then the winter comes again, and here we are. How about in Germany? Do you have snow?
It's very minimal. I'm actually kind of disappointed that we never get a real accumulation. And if we do, it only lasts for half a day and then it's gone.
Oh,
I actually kind of miss the snow.
well, you can take some of ours.
One thing that I did happen to notice whenever I was looking at the Amazon page was that there are 18 books in the series, The Science of, and you and your writing partner have five of them. How did you get involved in that?
Our publisher has the series, and we noticed the science of Harry Potter,
Hmm.
the science of superheroes, something like that. And we realized there was not any in their series about the horror genre. And it was such a perfect fit because this is what we were talking about anyway. And no one, to our knowledge, had talked about horror through that lens before. And so we wrote our proposal and a sample chapter, and it was just the perfect fit.
That is so cool. I don't think that most people would have thought to do something like that. I mean, whenever they go to think, I want to write a book, they just think, I'll go write a standalone book on my own and do this.
Right.
That's really interesting that you managed to get in on a series like that. I mean, that's an
Yes.
achievement.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been so much fun doing interviews about it and meeting people, interviewing people for our books, because we are always learning and we love sharing that knowledge with the world.
I also noticed on your events page that you got to select horror shorts for this year's North by North Film Festival in Duluth.
Yes, they've rebranded it. It's Minnesota International Film Festival now.
Mhm.
And I love watching all of the submissions, seeing everybody from student films to very accomplished filmmakers and what they create in the horror genre. We had a micro short last year that was a minute long.
Mhm.
And to tell an entire story in a minute is amazing. And then some
Yes.
other, longer films, 17, 20 minutes. I just think it's such a cool way to tell a story.
I love going to things like that because you get to find work that has like a different point of view than you see in theaters. Because whenever
Yes,
people are doing these independent pieces, they can do things that they don't have to necessarily think about the producer and what they're going to approve and the studio and what they're going to let you do. You can
exactly.
do so many more things that might be outside the market.
Yes. And I love it too because you can find, not the mass audience, but just your little niche of who is this for? And even if it's not for a lot of people, creating the art that you want to create, like you said, without those boundaries of somebody telling you can't because of budget or
Mhm.
how much is it going to make at the box office. The other thing I love about film festivals is just meeting creators and like-minded people and learning about their craft and their art and the stories that they want to tell. I think it's so valuable. And even if you're not a filmmaker yourself, I encourage people to go to film festivals just to experience that and support creators. It's really a lot of fun.
Now, are you going to be at the film festival helping to present these?
Yes, and I'll be doing Q&As after the films. So talking to any filmmakers that are present or actors in the films, whoever is there.
That sounds like a great event. Are you going to have some of your books there too to sign in case anybody is interested in buying books off of you?
I always have them around. So I literally have a box of books in my vehicle because oftentimes I'll be somewhere and I'm like, oh, hey, I got to drop this off here, or somebody asks for one. And so, yeah, I've always got books around.
This has been just so wonderful talking to you. Is there anything that you would like to add? Just something that you think that the listeners need to know about you or anything that you have coming up?
I would say just keep an eye out for our next books coming out. We're also going to be in Baltimore in May, at this horror convention called Horror on Main. It's the very first year, and we are being brought out. We're guests of honor. And so we'll be signing books there and looking forward to meeting a lot of fellow horror fans.
They have horror conventions here in Germany too, in case
Oh,
you're ever looking to try and go to some international events.
that would be awesome. We've done several in the past and had tables for books. My favorite is just people watching and all the costumes that people come up with. People are so creative and talented.
Oh, yeah. And here I have actually seen some incredible professional movie level monster outfits. There was somebody, I got a picture with this guy who was walking around as the alien from Aliens.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I mean, it was just an incredible costume. It was so well done. And there are always tons of predators and just incredible science fiction and Star Wars costumes that I can't even begin to imagine how much money people spend on these costumes because they are film level quality.
Yes.
I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast for me because like I said, I am just a lifelong horror movie fan. So this has been such a treat for me. And I already bought the book, The Science of Monsters, and I plan on buying some of the others too because it just covers all of the things that I love.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
So there you have it, the fantastic Kelly Florence. Be sure to check out all of her links that are in the description of the podcast today. You can find her on all of her social media. You can find the buy links for her books. You can find her podcast. Check her out. She is so much fun. She has so much knowledge to share. You will not regret it. Now, while you're at it, why don't you check out our social media? Check out our Linktree link that has all of our links to all of our social media. And plus, you can just find us at Burkhart Books everywhere. I mean, that's basically it. BurkhartBooks.com or do at Burkhart Books and you'll find us on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. We use the same little tag everywhere, so we're very easy to find. Follow us on social media. We would really appreciate it. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. We have so many fantastic author guests coming up. You will not want to miss a single one of them. But for now, it is that time for all of you to go out into the world and be happy.